Okay. Well, hi. First, I think everyone can probably hear me at this point because I can hear myself. So, thank you, Guido. That was a fantastic presentation, and I'm very glad you definitely touched on some of the points of generational change. I'll go ahead and just preface this with my name's Josh Elkins. I'm a software developer for the Virginia DMV in the US. So, let's see. And at any point, if anyone has a question or I'm talking too fast, interrupt me, tell me, I don't mind. Okay, so first off, I think everyone here pretty much knows what the DMV is, right? So the DMV is that place you have to go every few years where usually you sit with a few grumpy people for an hour or two. You kind of commiserate together. You pay money that you probably don't think you owe to a locality or a state. You get a piece of paper and then you forget about it for about 5 years or more. So, with that, I mean, yes, that's how the public sees it. Totally understandable. But in our case, we actually think that we do a lot more than that. We've actually recently revamped our mission statement, safeguarding lives, securing identities, serving the motoring public, and supporting industry partners. As you'll notice there's a lot of active verbs. And the intention there is to basically show that our agency is not just dictating to the public what they need to be doing, but actually collaborating and trying to break down any silos between either government, citizen populations, and constituencies. So with that, we've undergone a pretty radical shift, I would say, within my time there. I started in 2008, right out of high school, because I didn't know what I wanted to go to school for. I thought I wanted to go into medicine. I realized I did not have the stomach for it, so code is what it was. So I'm going to go ahead and advance. So I'm going to go over 4 topics, but I will warn you now, I do bounce around a bit, so sorry. But I promise it will be entertaining. So quick about us, which won't take long, how we are innovating and modernizing at the Virginia DMV. A sprinting to the finish and how DMV is transitioning from a monolithic waterfall development style into a more agile development style. And finally, just a quick closing and Q&A for any questions or ideas that come up in the middle that, maybe I can answer it, maybe not, and if I can't, I will find out who can. Okay, so let's see. A quick overview just to kind of set the ground of what the Virginia DMV is. We're headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. Last time I checked, it was 3,936 miles from here, I think. So I still have jet lag, almost like I got here Thursday. I still have some jet lag. We have 76 customer service centers, which are actually the physical offices that you would go into. Within each of those offices, it's a varying number of employees, but that's our primary public customer service facing outlet. We have motor carrier service centers, which I think they call them lorries here, right, instead of semis or trucks, that actually weigh the trucks and inspect the fuel to make sure that there is not any sort of dyed fuel or anything where people are basically trying to skip on paying taxes for things. And there's also a recent development in that one of moving towards also monitoring for human trafficking. In our particular state, Virginia, our governor has taken a very, very strong stance on trying to prevent human trafficking wherever possible. So that's just one innovation, not a typical innovation, obviously, but just a way of using an existing service to do something we couldn't do before, or we didn't do before. With that, we have nearly 2,000 employees. Of course, that spans a full gamut of IT staff, customer service agents, people processing correspondence at our main office, those sorts of things. We have over 60 authorized partners, which are either vendors that we work with and expose APIs to, or people that we actually authorize to process transactions on behalf of us. So we process driver's licenses, ID cards, vehicle registrations. Basically, if you need it to drive and it's not physically part of your car, minus your license plate, you probably get it from us, if you're in Virginia. Okay. Last bits, we have more than 50 online transactions and service offerings. Virginia was actually the first state agency that allowed for an online driver's license renewal in the world. I've heard disputes on that, but I verified it. It's not true. Lastly, we process about 17 million transactions as of last year, fiscal year 2023, and that's the state's fiscal year. Okay, so just a quick about me, because I've been talking about the DMV. I promise I actually do have a life. So my current position, like I said, I've been with the agency since 2008, and I started as a customer service rep. From that, I found my way into project management, business procedure analysis, process management, and finally somehow landed up on coding. So with that, I began coding at 15, probably a little bit before that. I can tell you HTML is not a programming language, so I don't say I started programming at 15. Some people will say it is, but it's not. Finally, you could probably tell I'm an avid Mariah Carey fan. I will not do the whistle note, even though I can. They didn't pay for that part. And finally, I live with my partner and 2 cats in Richmond, Virginia, these 2 knuckleheads. And the last thing, just kind of interesting, and I actually had a new idea after yesterday. I'm working on a web app that is intended to basically help homeless or transient individuals find resources to take care of their animals. Because, I mean, it's definitely a sad sight, obviously, to see someone with an animal they love and they don't have a home. So anyway, that's that. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to touch on is how we're innovating and how we're actually modernizing. So the core services are first what I want to go over, because while these are your typical bread and butter DMV services, they actually are innovative in some ways. Of course, you have your standard driver's licenses, vehicle titles, online processes, and let's see what else. Disabled placards and compliance services. So basically data warehouses and making sure that people are actually licensed to be on the road between different jurisdictions. But what's actually really interesting with this is actually a very, very good illustration of how DMV is actually modernizing. When I actually started at the DMV in 2008, I was working on a green screen. So you have to imagine going through working with different types of editors, Eclipse editors primarily, and different IDEs, how much of a shock it was to have to log into a terminal. It was a culture shock for me, and at 18, I'll be honest, it was not the thing I wanted to advertise to my friends that I was doing. However, clearly I liked it enough to stay. So with that, we, of course, do the bread and butter DMV services, but what we also have done in my time there, we've progressed a lot more with integrating with other government agencies. And those all focus on a goal of providing the best value for the customer and trying to keep them out of our offices as much as possible, because they want to go there as much as we want to go to work some days. So let's see. And I want to make sure I cover all of this. Okay, so first, how we're actually doing this. And I'm not going to read you guys bullet points because you can all read. So when I first started, I started on a green screen, like I said. When I actually transitioned into the IT field, I also started working on a green screen, which at that point I think I was probably 24. And it was definitely culture shock. I could not have done it without the mentorship that I had and the resources that were made available by both my agency and then honestly the personal time that people took to actually make sure I understood this. Because one thing, and I'm very glad Guido touched on it a lot, was basically the culture shift that's happening. In my time, 16 years there is a huge culture shift, and I think we've all seen it happening. At one time, I was literally the youngest person on my team with 6 other IBM mainframe developers working in Adabas Natural, and then supporting a Windows front end for some components of it. And with that, it was not easy. I very rarely actually cry, but I think I cried over a histogram once. So I will never admit that to anyone, but I did. So surprise. Let's see, but let me actually focus on my slides. So one of the things we're working on is, instead of having these big monolithic systems that is, for lack of a better term, spaghetti code in a lot of ways, we're focusing on streamlining these and not necessarily moving them into their own silos, but into their own kind of topical areas. So when we have new developers come on right out of college or either through our internships, we're able to clearly show them how these systems are actually organized. Because while to the layman or the outsider, you may just think a driver's license is a driver's license, right? It's actually a lot more than that. And unfortunately, some of it's by design, but a lot of it's by regulation. Um, so with that, we are moving towards a more API-driven and microservice architecture, which is fantastic using Natural One. Because previously, literally logged into a TN 2370 or 3270 emulator, logged into the mainframe, and I'll be honest, I don't know what the hell a PF key is. Sorry. So with that, Natural One has made that a lot easier. It made it a lot easier of a transition in my case. Let's see, some of the other ways we're modernizing. We are moving towards DevOps for CI and CD. We're going towards automated testing. We have a pretty robust automated testing suite that we execute against our applications, but we're working on enhancing that for greater code coverage. And then, of course, non-standard scenarios. We're also moving towards mobile first and responsive design, which it's the DMV. We should have done it 10 years ago, but we were busy being the DMV. So let's see. We're also working towards platform neutral frameworks, which is great because obviously platform independent. And then the tools that we're actually using for that, like I said a moment ago, we're using Natural One, the IDE based on Eclipse, obviously, to actually communicate with some of our .NET web services on the back end. We're using the entire X broker RPC client for that, or excuse me, ACI client. Of course, our mainframe itself uses Adabase extensively, actually almost solely for data. And then, of course, the natural language to obviously write the code. Okay, so I've been a little all over the place, but I do want to make sure that I've covered what DMV's core mission is. So we want to make sure that the interactions that you have as a citizen with the Virginia DMV, they're actually not just focused on regulating you as a customer, regulating the documents, collecting money. We do strive to actually be the best service provider in state government that we can possibly be. Through that, we tailor the interactions. We try to make our services and any of our UIs and UX very, very focused on convenience, speed, and reducing clutter, and making it very clear to a customer what they're trying to obtain. So with that, we've extended a wider array of services. So for example, voter registration. We are by law required to offer voter registration services in the US and Virginia. However, we actually transitioned that from a fully paper process to a mobile process, or not mobile process, but electronic process. So that actually speeds up the customer service interaction quite a bit, and we also found that that particular example improved customer understanding of what they were actually doing. Additionally, we routinely conduct surveys with our customers through our website as well as at our front counter through the tablets they have. Let's see. And of course, we routinely review the customer data we have and the survey results just to make sure that how we're offering these services is the most efficient way possible. And, of course, everything can't be simple, but we do our best to try to make it that way. Okay, so like I said a moment ago, a lot of that is through APIs, which APIs. With that, we've actually been able to accomplish quite a bit in a very short period of time. Within the past 7 years, I believe, we've actually made full integrations with the Department of Homeland Security for U.S. passport verification, NCIC for National Criminal Information Center. So that basically is the national registry or clearinghouse for stolen vehicles, people who may have stolen an identity, are licensed to drive or not licensed to drive in another state. So more or less, it just provides for interstate communication, basically across the board. Let's see. And of course, with all of that, these interfaces, while there are some .NET components, a large majority, probably over 80%, uses Adabas Natural for this. And a lot of these, of course, use request document, which when you mentioned the JSON parsing, I was very excited, so I want to know more about that. Okay. Okay, so of course, the results of this innovation, you are never going to know the immediate result. It takes time to gather data. So one of the problems I've noticed a lot, which this is why Agile is, in my opinion, a better way to do things. It's not perfect, but it's better for some things. It's hard to gauge satisfaction, 2 days after you implement something. I mean, because the problem is at that point, you're just going to be reactive to whatever feedback you get, and you're not truly considering the breadth of the changes you make and the ultimate scope. With that, we're trying to reduce wait times. We're also trying to reduce the transaction complexity through improving our UIs and UX. And of course, all of this is a lot easier because we have a reliable mainframe on the back end. While Windows interfaces, yes, they may seem sexier in some cases. A blue screen of death is not sexy in any way. So I'll take what I can get. With that, we found that it actually improves our engagement between customers and employees because of the reliability. It's a lot easier or a lot less often that we have to tell a customer, I'm sorry, we can't help you because our system is down. So by being a partner with Software AG and being a customer, we certainly benefit from that reliability and stability. And overall, by taking all of this information in and being observant of basically our customer interactions, gathering data, and being willing to admit that we're not perfect and be willing to implement change, that actually gives us a better opportunity and puts us in a better position for continuous improvement and development. And this is why spell check is your friend. Wouldn't have happened if I was doing it in Natural 1. Okay, so I'll be honest, I tried to come up with a witty title. It eventually had something about a flag or something, but this was the best I came up with. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick show of hands. So of course, variety of industry, variety of experience in this room, and a large generational swath, which is fantastic. So put your hand up if you are currently in a waterfall development shop. I'm not gonna, there's no point, so you don't get anything or you don't get any demerits. Okay, so of course, I started in a waterfall shop, and while coming right out of a little bit of college, some coding, that was all I knew. And so again, I strongly identify waterfall with monolith because it's very, very iterative. There's a lot going on in the background, and specifically, there's a lot to be desired as far as collaboration goes. Because of course, we've all been through it where you have your business, you work with them, you gather requirements, and you do it all at the front. And of course, 90% through the project, a couple weeks prior to implementing, oh, well, this requirement isn't covered in here, or I had this great idea. While I never stifle great ideas, I just say, why couldn't you have thought about that earlier? So with that, of course, this path of waterfall is initiation, requirements, definition, design, integration, testing, deployment, and maintenance, and implementation. So rinse and repeat in a lot of cases. What we found in my experience with it as well was limited flexibility. So if you get to that 90% mark in your project and you're 2 weeks out from implementing and deploying, 9 times out of 10 in my experience, if they really, really want or need that feature and bandwidth is very small, it unfortunately ends up being a hack that you're going to regret later. You always say you're going to come back to it, you never do. It also delays issue discovery, progress is a lot harder, and there's certainly a lot less innovation in my experience that happens with it. And what I mean by that is sticking to such a strong or solely waterfall approach, it's basically, you do some things on autopilot is kind of how I describe it, because you have a prescribed process, you go through that and you don't necessarily have either the environment, the collaboration, or the same team dynamics that would allow you to either implement that new feature or improve that, because you are so focused on this iterative process and you're getting through it, and 9 times out of 10 you're going to have to basically redo it to some extent. Documentation, while it's definitely necessary, it slows some of the momentum and velocity and all of that fun stuff. Unclear requirements, if they're gathered at the front end of the project, or your business owners or areas aren't necessarily clear about what their expectation is or what their requirement is, you get stuck, obviously, towards the end, either rushing to implement that as a hack in some cases, or you have to do several deployments and several revisions to get what they want. And of course, anytime you have to go back and do something over again, you are preventing yourself from starting a new project. Okay, so the way that we've actually started Agile, and I'm going to step away from the slide for a moment because I want to touch back on the generational aspect of it. So I'll be honest, in my case, I came in at 23 or 24 years old. I was honestly the only person on my team under the age of 60. And it was scary, I'll be honest with you. I have never been cursed out in Russian before. That ended up being my best mentor I ever had. And coincidentally, that allowed me to be able to confidently say that Adabas Natural was my first programming language. So yeah. So with that, the one thing I want to stress, and Agile is not a strictly A to Z or A to B path you take. And it's not easy, because the one thing I think I've tried to tell people with my organization is we have to eliminate silos and we have to eliminate egos. Because let's be honest, some days when you code something, you feel like a god, like I understand everything. And then some days when it's a syntax error, you're like, I know nothing. So that's one of the things that I've found. So having open communication, being very, very clear with your team, and being able to admit that you're wrong. Those are things that I found are very, very helpful in our transition to Agile. It's definitely not perfect, but what I also think is that in the Agile process, it allows for newer employees to basically do pair programming in some cases. Because right now, for example, we have a couple of people who just graduated from UVA with University of Virginia within the past couple of years. Brilliant. And you can probably imagine when they had to log in to start looking at some JCL, what their reaction was. What's TSO? So anyway, things like that, Agile has been fantastic for us with, because it really gives an opportunity for the real experts, the people that have been doing the work for 30 plus years in some cases. It gives them the opportunity to actually sit with them and learn. And because of sprints and the iterations that we have and the daily stand-ups, it gives a good opportunity for them to get a more hands-on deep dive into something. And while you don't have to know everything at the beginning, it's a collaborative and continuous process. Let's see, with that, one of the other things that I think we struggled with prior to moving to Agile, we struggle, and we do still to some extent, struggle with prioritization. Can anyone raise their hand if they think their organization struggles with prioritization? There's more of you than that. So with that, Agile gives us a much, much clearer view. And if there are any managers in here, please cover your ears. A lot of the times it gives you the opportunity, or not opportunity, but it puts the cards on the table of which of these products do you want? Because yes, everyone wants everything at the same time, but ultimately we have to collaborate and agree on what our priority is. So with that, it allows us for more adaptive planning too. So we can try to, I think the best skill I've gotten out of our transition to this is negotiation. Because obviously not everybody can have what they want at the same time. So I think by having it exposed in our daily stand-ups, for example, and in our planning meetings, retrospectives, and um, basically sprint planning ceremonies, with all of that, we actually have the opportunity as developers and IT managers in some cases to communicate to the business where we actually sit. And I think they have a better understanding of the complexity because previously, if in a strictly waterfall environment, you had your project, your requirements were given to you on a piece of paper in some cases. Your developers took it, came back in a few months and said, this is what you get. And it really, it created a unique problem for us where many of our IT staff had better understandings of some of the more complicated business processes than the actual business owners and product owners. And of course, we are actively working to change that, which is why when I saw Eris in action yesterday, that was fantastic. I'm like ready to give him my Amex. Okay, so back to this. So we've definitely done our best to try to be strictly agile, which unfortunately being strictly agile is not as easy as you would think because a lot of people do the half agile approach. So with that, let's see, it focuses on iteration. We've been building multidisciplinary teams, and a lot of that is, like I said, through pair programming in some cases. So for example, if someone's more skilled strictly on the natural side and their experience with EntireX isn't there, or they just aren't so sure about client-server communication, that allows for that. So basically, a lot of people are probably on the path to becoming full stack developers, whereas previously their focus would have just been on application development alone. The big thing is feedback loops to get constant feedback, having stakeholder collaboration, and the retrospectives are very important. And then, like I said earlier, encouraging open communication. That is one of the most important parts, and I specifically just want to reinforce it. Egos and silos just need to be gone in IT. I mean, there is no, I mean, we're all smart people. Let's see, but of course, be respectful. Okay, and so how it's going with us. We have actually increased our production output quite a bit. I unfortunately did not have numbers to attach to this because we are still pretty early in our process. We have gotten features to our customers a lot faster, and to the point where our commissioner was surprised that a board he was looking at was already outdated because the feature was implemented earlier that day. And that's honestly, it's fantastic. And I mean, it's kind of nice to say. So with that, that basically covers that one. Okay, so I just went over a whole giant set of topics in like 10 minutes. So are there any questions that anyone has?
Thanks. It sounds like you've embraced DevOps, which is great, and increasing productivity. And there's a number of things that have to be implemented, products, etc. One of the key items, and you've invested in that, is test cases to automate it. Have you addressed the fact that certain enhancements have a direct impact on your test cases? Example, adding any kind of data item means that you have to recreate or modify your test cases.
Yes, exactly. So in our particular example, right now we are in the process of basically building up that team, right? We have a few key resources that have their own dedicated applications that they focus either some of their manual testing resources on, but their primary focus should be automating. So we, in our case, use HP's UFT and ALM. So we've got that with both any Windows clients, our web applications, and of course, any interface that still uses a green screen, because there are some of those still. So we go through regression testing, but as far as having to update them after the fact, it's a never-ending process. They have actually just recently gone from a more, I don't think waterfall personally really applies to automated testing, but I'm open to hearing if anyone disagrees with that. But agile works very well for what they're doing, because it's allowed for better communication with the actual development staff, because previously, and I'll be honest, I'm guilty of it. I would do something, I would code it, do as much documentation as I had time to, and say to the automated tester, this is what you should see. And it's not always the most efficient process. So going through after that, documenting your changes, making sure that everyone's well informed. I mean, again, communication, that is how we've been dealing with it. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, I can. Oh, okay, I understand, I understand. Yes, I mean, so from the perspective of if there are functional changes, or what code base or those sorts of things like infrastructure components. Okay. Mhm.
Then your existing test cases are probably sufficient. But if you're adding new data items, yes, you have to add them to the database, but your test cases will have to be regenerated.
Right. So in those, I apologize. In those cases, of course, they're scripted just to match whatever the, whatever the results are expected to be. So it's a continuous process.
Thank you. So I'm a customer of Virginia DMV, and I want you to know that how friendly this application is and everything that they've done to make it user interface and app I can get on my cell phone, that the notorious wait times that you hear about at motor vehicle places don't happen for us.
No, actually, I'm very glad you mentioned that too. Prior to us moving to a much more streamlined and honestly a lot less redundant process for some items, specifically driver's licensing, we've actually seen our wait times go from about 20 minutes or so down to less than 10 in many cases. And we've done that, thankfully, by having reliable systems, fast systems, and having the staff that actually understands how these processes work. I meant to mention it earlier, but Eric, please correct me if I get the exact date wrong because it's before I was born, but Virginia has been a Software AG customer since 1989, correct? Okay. So obviously it works well, but it has allowed for us to have the opportunities to make those improvements because we are not solely focused on having to do all of this back-end work just to keep it running. I mean, there's a lot of people here who here did not learn Adabas or Natural as their first programming language? Okay, great. So you understand going from either object-oriented COBOL or anything like that, or even Python, Java, it's different, but there's a certain level of ease and there's a better word for it, but there's a level of ease and that comes with it, I found at least. Thankfully, it's easy to understand. It's in English. Now, with Natural One, the interface or IDE is much easier to use. And frankly, one of the more confusing things initially for me was the testing aspect of it. Because if I had to start a broker server in a green screen session and then connect a Windows client to it, one, there was no documentation. But two, they didn't teach me that in school. So anyway.
Thank you, Josh. We have one last quick question, if you guys can bear with us. I know we're right into break time, but let's make this.
Just for curiosity, as far as I know, there are some more or less famous federal agencies in Virginia. Does that have an influence on your work with respect to special demands of very special customers, or with respect to collaboration with these agencies? And please be very careful not to reveal any classified
I was about to tell you,
information.
unfortunately, there's a bit I can't say there. I can touch on the second part, but not the first part. There are several partnerships we have, federal, state, and I don't believe there are any that are particularly like with one state versus another in our case. But within the state agency enclave and then the federal government, yes, we do maintain integrations with them. And I apologize, the second part of your question?
Your
So anytime that we expose an API or any product, of course, there's an integration guide that we give them. We're very, very specific, and we try to be very personable with these, with these consumers of any of these APIs, specifically because obviously I really enjoyed the word that was used yesterday by Sabash of AI hallucinations. While this isn't necessarily AI specific, data and data being wrong can give obviously incorrect perceptions of things. And in our case, it impacts the choices we make and the requirements that are, put on our citizens. So keeping the communication open and validating results between partners is, we really do focus on that.
So we're going to get ready to take a break, head out for coffee, and at that time, there's a lot of great questions. Please corner Josh and get his answers. But would love to thank you so much for presenting. Let's give Josh a good round of applause.